Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she struggled to complete another set of push-ups. The military training ground was hot and dusty, and her arms felt like they were about to give out. Around her, the other recruits moved with ease through the exercise routine that seemed impossible for her small frame. "Come on, Martinez. My grandmother could do better than that," shouted Drill Sergeant Williams from across the field. The other recruits snickered as Sarah's arms shook with exhaustion. She had always been the smallest person in her training group, standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing only 110 pounds. Marcus Thompson, a tall, muscular recruit from Texas, jogged past her with a smirk. "Maybe you should have joined the Girl Scouts instead of the Army," he whispered loud enough for others to hear. The group erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. This had been her reality for the past 8 weeks of basic training. Every day brought new challenges that seemed designed to prove she didn't belong. During obstacle courses, she struggled to climb over walls that others scaled effortlessly. In hand-to-hand combat training, she was easily overpowered by recruits twice her size. Even carrying her full pack during long marches left her falling behind the group. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges. It was the constant mockery from her fellow recruits. They had given her the nickname Tiny, and some even called her the weakest link. During meal times, conversations would stop when she sat down, and whispered jokes would follow her wherever she went. Jennifer Walsh, another female recruit who had befriended some of the guys, was particularly cruel. "I don't understand why they even let people like her join," she would say loudly. "She's just going to get someone killed in real combat." These words cut deeper than any physical training ever could. Sarah's bunk was next to the window, and many nights she would lie awake, listening to the other recruits talk about her. They would discuss how she would never make it through training, how she was wasting everyone's time, and how the drill sergeants should just send her home. Sometimes she wondered if they were right, but Sarah had her reasons for being there. She came from a small town in New Mexico where opportunities were limited. Her father had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. Joining the military was her chance to get an education, learn valuable skills, and maybe even help her family financially. More than that, Sarah had always felt different from other girls her age. While they talked about makeup and boys, she was fascinated by strategy games and military history. She had read every book about famous battles and military tactics that her small-town library had to offer. Something deep inside her knew she belonged in this world, even if her body didn't seem built for it. The mockery reached its peak during weapons training. When it came time to learn about different firearms, Sarah struggled with the heavy assault rifles. Her small hands had trouble gripping the weapons properly, and the recoil would knock her off balance. The other recruits would exchange knowing looks and shake their heads in disappointment. "Look at her trying to handle that rifle," Marcus said during one training session. "It's bigger than she is." The group laughed again, and even some of the drill sergeants seemed to share their doubts about Sarah's capabilities. During tactical training exercises, Sarah was often chosen last for teams. When group leaders picked their members, they would scan the lineup and their eyes would skip right over her. She became used to standing alone until someone was forced to take her on their team, usually with visible reluctance. The psychological pressure was enormous. Sarah began to doubt herself more with each passing day. Maybe she really wasn't cut out for this life. Maybe her dreams of serving her country were just foolish fantasies. The constant criticism and mockery were wearing her down, making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. During one particularly difficult week, the recruits were learning urban warfare tactics. The exercise involved moving through a mock city environment, working in teams to complete various objectives. Sarah's team was tasked with securing a building and gathering intelligence, but when they reached their target, things went wrong quickly. The team leader, a recruit named David Kim, made the mistake of rushing into the building without proper surveillance. Almost immediately, they triggered an alarm system that alerted the opposing team to their location. Instead of adapting their strategy, David panicked and ordered everyone to retreat. Sarah tried to suggest an alternative approach she had read about in her military strategy books, but David cut her off. "We don't have time for your theories, Tiny," he snapped. "Just follow orders and try not to slow us down." The team ended up failing the exercise completely, and during the debrief session, several members blamed Sarah for their poor performance, claiming her suggestions had been distracting. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, picking at her food while the successful teams celebrated their victories. She watched other recruits laugh and bond over their shared experiences, knowing she would never be truly accepted into their circle. The isolation was almost unbearable. But something interesting had been happening during these training exercises, something that only a few people had noticed. While Sarah struggled with physical tasks, her tactical thinking was exceptional. During wargame scenarios, she could quickly identify weaknesses in enemy positions and suggest strategies that others missed. Her knowledge of military history allowed her to reference successful tactics from famous battles and apply them to current situations. Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the quieter drill instructors, had been watching Sarah more carefully than the others realized. He noticed how she studied maps during breaks, how she asked thoughtful questions about tactics during briefings, and how her strategic suggestions often made perfect sense, even when her teammates ignored them. There was also something else Rodriguez had observed. Despite all the mockery and criticism, Sarah never quit. Other recruits who faced far less adversity had dropped out of the program, but Sarah kept pushing forward. Even when she failed at physical tasks, she would get up and try again. Even when her teammates blamed her for their failures, she continued to offer helpful suggestions. Her determination was remarkable. The training base was about to receive some very important visitors. Word had spread among the drill sergeants that a group of high-ranking military officials would be arriving to observe the recruits and evaluate the training program. Among these visitors would be Colonel Elizabeth Hayes, a legendary figure in special operations who rarely made public appearances. Colonel Hayes had a reputation that inspired both fear and respect throughout the military. She was known for her incredible tactical mind and her ability to identify potential in people that others overlooked. Her nickname among Special Forces units was the Colonel, and stories of her successful missions were told in military academies around the world. Sarah knew nothing about these upcoming visits. She was too focused on trying to survive each day of training, dealing with the constant criticism, and fighting her own doubts about whether she belonged in the military. She had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. The other recruits continued their mockery, unaware that someone very important would soon be watching their every move. They had no idea that their treatment of Sarah would soon be observed by one of the most respected military leaders in the country. Most importantly, they had no clue that Sarah possessed something special that would catch the attention of Colonel Hayes immediately. As Sarah prepared for another difficult day of training, she had no way of knowing that everything she had endured was about to make sense. The mockery, the isolation, and the constant testing of her resolve had been preparing her for something far greater than basic training. Her real journey was about to begin, and it would shock everyone who had ever doubted her abilities. The morning of the inspection arrived with unusual tension in the air. Drill Sergeant Williams had warned all recruits that important visitors would be observing their training, and everyone needed to perform at their absolute best. The recruits spent extra time polishing their boots and making sure their uniforms were perfect. Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach as she prepared for what would likely be another day of embarrassment. She knew that with important people watching, her failures would be even more visible and humiliating. The other recruits seemed excited about the chance to impress their visitors, but Sarah just hoped to avoid making any major mistakes. Colonel Elizabeth Hayes arrived at the base in an unmarked black vehicle, accompanied by 3 other high-ranking officers. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a presence that commanded immediate respect. Her uniform displayed numerous ribbons and medals that spoke of years of distinguished service and dangerous missions. As the colonel stepped onto the training ground, conversations stopped and everyone straightened their posture. Even the drill sergeants seemed nervous in her presence. Sarah had never seen anyone command such automatic respect just by walking into a room. The morning began with standard physical training exercises. Sarah struggled through sit-ups and pull-ups while the other recruits performed with extra enthusiasm for their visitors. She could feel the colonel's eyes scanning the group, taking mental notes about each recruit's performance and attitude. During a running exercise, Sarah fell behind the main group as usual. She could hear Marcus and some of the others making jokes about her pace, But she noticed something different today. Colonel Hayes was not just watching the fastest runners at the front of the pack. Instead, her attention seemed focused on the recruits who were struggling, especially Sarah. The real test came during the tactical training exercise that afternoon. The recruits were divided into two teams for a complex scenario involving hostage rescue in an urban environment. Sarah found herself on the team led by Marcus, who immediately assigned her to the least important position in their formation. "Just stay back and try not to mess anything up," Marcus told her in front of the other team members. The visiting officers were close enough to hear this comment, and Sarah noticed Colonel Hayes raise an eyebrow but say nothing. The scenario began with both teams receiving intelligence about hostages being held in different buildings within the training complex. Marcus's team was assigned to rescue hostages from a 3-story building while avoiding numerous obstacles and simulated enemy positions. Marcus immediately started barking orders, trying to impress the watching officers with his loud confidence and aggressive approach. He ordered his team to charge directly toward the target building, ignoring basic surveillance and reconnaissance protocols that they had been taught. Sarah quietly tried to suggest that they should first study the building layout and identify potential escape routes, but Marcus dismissed her input. "We don't have time for your overthinking," he snapped. Real soldiers act decisively. As the team approached the target building, they walked directly into an obvious ambush. The opposing team had positioned themselves perfectly to catch anyone who approached without proper reconnaissance. Within minutes, most of Marcus's team members had been eliminated from the exercise by simulated enemy fire. Marcus panicked as his plan fell apart. He started shouting contradictory orders, telling his remaining team members to advance and retreat at the same time. The exercise was becoming a complete disaster, and Sarah could see the disappointment on the faces of the observing officers. That's when something remarkable happened. Sarah stepped forward and took control of the situation. In a calm, clear voice, she began giving tactical instructions to the remaining team members. She had noticed details about the building and enemy positions that everyone else had missed. "There's a service entrance on the east side that they're not watching," she explained quickly. "If 2 people create a distraction at the front, the rest of us can enter through the back and reach the hostages from an unexpected direction." For the first time since training began, her teammates actually listened to her suggestions. They were desperate enough to try anything, and Sarah's confidence was surprising even to herself. She felt like all those hours studying military tactics were finally paying off. Sarah directed the diversion perfectly, using her knowledge of classical military strategies to coordinate the team's movements. She remembered a similar tactic used in World War II urban warfare and adapted it to their current situation. The plan worked flawlessly, and her team successfully rescued all the hostages while avoiding further casualties. The transformation was incredible to watch. The same recruits who had been mocking Sarah all morning were now following her orders without question. Her tactical thinking was so clear and effective that even Marcus stepped back and let her take charge of the operation. Colonel Hayes moved closer to observe Sarah's leadership during the exercise. She watched as Sarah coordinated her team's movements with precision and calm authority that seemed impossible for someone so young and inexperienced. The colonel's expression remained neutral, but her attention was completely focused on Sarah's performance. After the exercise concluded, the teams gathered for a debriefing session. The drill sergeants typically used these sessions to point out mistakes and reinforce lessons. But today they seemed uncertain how to handle what had happened. Sarah's team had achieved a complete victory after being on the verge of total failure. Marcus tried to take credit for the successful outcome. "My team worked together perfectly," he announced to the visiting officers. "We adapted our strategy when conditions changed, just like we were taught." Several other team members nodded in agreement, conveniently forgetting that Sarah had been the one directing their actions. Sarah said nothing during this false account of events. She was used to not receiving credit for her contributions, and she didn't want to create conflict in front of the important visitors. She assumed the officers would believe Marcus's version of events and forget about her role entirely. But Colonel Hayes had been watching everything very carefully. She had seen exactly who had taken control when the original plan failed. She had observed Sarah's tactical thinking and leadership abilities firsthand. Most importantly, she had noticed how Sarah handled both success and adversity with equal composure. During a break in the training schedule, Colonel Hayes approached Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing Sarah's progress throughout the training program. She asked several pointed questions about Sarah's background, her performance in different areas, and her overall potential as a soldier. Sergeant Rodriguez was honest in his assessment. He explained that Sarah struggled with many physical requirements, but possessed exceptional tactical intelligence and determination. He mentioned her extensive knowledge of military history and strategy, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her persistence despite constant discouragement from other recruits. The colonel also asked about the social dynamics within the training group. Sergeant Rodriguez reluctantly admitted that Sarah faced significant mockery and isolation from her fellow recruits, but he emphasized that she never let this treatment affect her performance or attitude toward others. That evening, Colonel Hayes requested a private meeting with the base commander to discuss the training program. During this conversation, she shared her observations about the recruits and made several recommendations for improvements to the curriculum. She also asked specific questions about one particular recruit who had caught her attention. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to her barracks expecting another evening of whispered criticism and social isolation. The other recruits were celebrating their performance during the inspection, convinced that they had impressed the visiting officers. Sarah listened to their excited conversations while cleaning her equipment alone. Marcus was holding court near the center of the barracks, retelling the story of the afternoon's exercise for anyone who would listen. In his version of events, he had masterminded the successful rescue operation while graciously allowing team members to contribute their ideas. Sarah's crucial role had been completely erased from his narrative. The colonel was definitely impressed with my leadership, Marcus boasted to his audience. You could see it in her eyes when I was directing the team. I bet she's already thinking about recommending me for advanced training programs. Other recruits chimed in with their own stories about how they had caught the attention of the visiting officers. They discussed which special programs they hoped to qualify for and what their military careers might look like after basic training. Sarah continued cleaning her gear, knowing that such opportunities were not meant for people like her. But unknown to Sarah and her fellow recruits, Colonel Hayes was already making plans that would change everything. She had seen something in Sarah that reminded her of her own early days in the military, when others had underestimated her potential because of her appearance and background. The colonel remembered what it felt like to be dismissed and undervalued by people who couldn't see past surface characteristics. She also remembered how satisfying it had been to prove those people wrong through exceptional performance and unwavering determination. As the evening progressed, Colonel Hayes made several phone calls to contacts in various special operations units. She was exploring possibilities that none of the recruits could have imagined, opportunities that existed far beyond the scope of regular military service. Sarah fell asleep that night, unaware that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. She had no idea that someone had finally recognized her true potential, or that years of mockery and doubt were about to be replaced by opportunities she had never dared to dream about. The other recruits also slept peacefully, confident in their superior abilities and certain that their talents had been properly recognized by the visiting officers. They had no way of knowing that the person they considered the weakest among them had actually caught the attention of one of the most powerful people in the military. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shock everyone at the training base and forever change how they viewed both Sarah and themselves. The real test was about to begin, and it would prove that sometimes the most valuable assets come in unexpected packages. The next morning started like any other day at the training base. Sarah woke up early, made her bed with military precision, and prepared for another day of challenging exercises and inevitable mockery. She had no idea that Colonel Hayes had spent most of the night making phone calls and reviewing classified files. During breakfast, the other recruits continued discussing the previous day's inspection. Marcus was still basking in what he believed was his impressive performance, while others shared their theories about which advanced programs they might qualify for after graduation. Sarah ate her meal quietly at the edge of the group, listening to their confident predictions about their military futures. She had learned not to participate in these conversations, knowing that her contributions would only invite more ridicule about her unrealistic ambitions. Everything changed when Drill Sergeant Williams entered the mess hall with an unusual expression on his face. He looked nervous and slightly confused as he scanned the room for someone specific. When his eyes found Sarah, he walked directly to her table. "Martinez," he said, in a tone that was different from his usual harsh bark. "You need to report to the base commander's office immediately. Bring all your personal belongings." The entire mess hall fell silent. Recruits being called to the commander's office was extremely rare, and bringing personal belongings usually meant only one thing: someone was being sent home. The other recruits exchanged knowing looks and whispered comments about how Sarah had finally been eliminated from the program. Marcus couldn't resist making one final comment as Sarah gathered her things. "Well, I guess they finally realized what we all knew from the beginning," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just aren't cut out for this life." Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment as she walked through the silent mess hall. After weeks of struggling and fighting to prove herself, it seemed like her military dreams were about to end in the most humiliating way possible. She had failed, just like everyone had predicted. The walk to the commander's office felt like the longest journey of her life. Sarah tried to prepare herself for the conversation ahead, thinking about how she would explain her failure to her family and what she would do with her life after being dismissed from the military. When she reached the commander's office, Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting outside the door. He gave her an encouraging nod that seemed strange given the circumstances. "Go ahead and knock," he said. "They're waiting for you." Sarah knocked on the door with a trembling hand, and a voice from inside told her to enter. She stepped into the office, expecting to see the base commander behind his desk, ready to deliver the news of her dismissal. Instead, she found Colonel Hayes sitting in the commander's chair, with the base commander standing respectfully to one side. "Please have a seat, Martinez," Colonel Hayes said in a calm, professional tone. Sarah sat down stiffly, trying to maintain her composure, while preparing for the worst possible news. Colonel Hayes studied Sarah for a moment before speaking. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "You're Colonel Hayes. You were observing our training yesterday." "That's correct. And do you know why you're here?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "I assume I'm being dismissed from the program, ma'am. I know my performance hasn't met the standards expected of a soldier. I assume I'm being dismissed from the soldier." Colonel Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Your performance hasn't met standards? That's interesting. Tell me about yesterday's tactical exercise." Sarah was confused by the question but answered honestly. "My team was failing the hostage rescue scenario, ma'am. The original plan wasn't working, so I suggested some alternative tactics based on strategies I had studied. The team was able to complete the mission successfully." "And how did your teammates respond to your leadership during that exercise?" "They followed my suggestions, ma'am. I think they were just desperate enough to try anything at that point." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair, and for the first time, Sarah thought she detected a slight smile on the colonel's face. "Martinez, you're not here to be dismissed from the program. You're here because I have a very different kind of offer to make." Sarah's confusion deepened. "An offer?" She had no idea what that could mean. "Have you ever heard of the Black Vipers?" Colonel Hayes asked. Sarah shook her head. The name meant nothing to her. The Black Vipers are a highly classified special operations unit that handles some of our military's most sensitive missions. We specialize in situations that require exceptional tactical thinking, adaptability, and the ability to succeed against overwhelming odds. Our members are selected based on very specific criteria that have nothing to do with physical size or conventional military appearance. Sarah listened in stunned silence, unsure where this conversation was heading. Colonel Hayes continued. "Yesterday, I watched you demonstrate exactly the kind of tactical intelligence and leadership ability we look for in Black Viper candidates. While your teammates panicked under pressure, you remained calm and developed an effective strategy using classical military principles. More importantly, you took control of a failing situation and turned it into a complete success." "I don't understand, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that you have the potential to be an exceptional special operations soldier, Martinez. Your small size, which your fellow recruits see as a weakness, is actually a significant advantage for many of our missions. Your tactical intelligence is far superior to most soldiers I've encountered, and your ability to endure adversity and continue performing under pressure is exactly what we need." Sarah felt like the world was spinning around her. After months of being told she wasn't good enough, one of the most respected officers in the military was suggesting she had special abilities. Colonel Hayes reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder marked with various classification stamps. This contains information about a specialized training program that begins next week at a classified location. The program is extremely challenging, both mentally and physically. But it's designed to develop the unique skills needed for Black Viper operations. She slid the folder across the desk toward Sarah. I'm offering you the opportunity to join this program. If you accept, you'll leave this base immediately and begin training that will push you far beyond anything you've experienced here. If you succeed, you'll become part of an elite unit that handles missions most soldiers never even hear about. Sarah stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. What about basic training? What about graduation with my class? 1. Your basic training ends today, Colonel Hayes replied. You've already proven you have the skills we need. The other recruits can continue their standard military education, but you're ready for something much more advanced. But ma'am, Sarah said hesitantly, everyone here thinks I'm the weakest recruit. They've been saying I don't belong in the military at all. Colonel Hayes's expression became more serious. Martinez, in my experience, the people who mock others for being different are usually the ones who are most afraid of their own limitations. Your fellow recruits saw someone who looked different from them and assumed that meant you were inferior. They never bothered to recognize your actual capabilities. She leaned forward. Let me tell you something about the Black Vipers. We don't recruit people who look like traditional soldiers. We recruit people who think differently, who can solve problems that others can't even see, and who have the mental strength to succeed when conventional approaches fail. Yesterday you demonstrated all of these qualities. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in months, someone was telling her that she had value, that her different way of thinking was actually an asset rather than a liability. What would I tell my family? She asked. What would I tell the other recruits? You wouldn't tell them anything specific, Colonel Hayes replied. For security reasons, your assignment to the Black Vipers must remain classified. Your family will be informed that you've been selected for advanced special training. Your fellow recruits will be told that you've been transferred to a different program. Colonel Hayes stood up and walked around the desk to face Sarah directly. I need an answer today, Martinez. This opportunity won't wait, and there are other candidates we could approach instead. But I believe you have the potential to become one of our most valuable operatives. Sarah thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. All the mockery, all the nights lying awake wondering if she belonged, all the times she had been dismissed and underestimated. Suddenly it all made sense. Those experiences hadn't been meaningless suffering. They had been preparation for something extraordinary. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said firmly. I accept. Colonel Hayes smiled. The first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. Outstanding. Welcome to the Black Vipers, Martinez. Your real training begins today. As Sarah signed the papers that would change her life forever, she thought about Marcus and the others back in the mess hall. They were probably still discussing her supposed dismissal, completely unaware that the person they had ridiculed was about to embark on a military career beyond their wildest dreams. Colonel Hayes had one final surprise. There's something else you should know, she said as Sarah prepared to leave. The Black Viper unit has a tradition. Each operative earns a special designation based on their unique abilities and mission performance. Based on what I observed yesterday, and given your potential for tactical brilliance, I believe you'll earn one of our most prestigious designations. She paused dramatically. When you complete your training, you'll likely be known as Black Viper Mark 7, the tactical designation reserved for our most gifted strategic minds. Sarah left the base that afternoon with her belongings and a new understanding of her place in the world. As her transport vehicle pulled away from the training facility, she could see other recruits in the distance, continuing their routine exercises, unaware that one of their own was headed toward a destiny that would make her a legend in the special operations community. The girl they had called Tiny and the weakest link was about to become one of the most formidable soldiers in the military. And someday, when stories were told about the most successful Black Viper operations, people would speak with respect and admiration about the tactical genius known as Black Viper Mark 7. Colonel Hayes had been right about one thing. Sometimes the most valuable assets come in unexpected packages. Sarah Martinez was living proof that true strength isn't always visible on the surface, and that the people who seem different might actually be exactly what the world needs most.